What if the one being who was sworn to never interfere chose to intervene at the exact moment the universe needed him most, or feared him most? The stars were silent, not peaceful, but watching. In a distant quadrant beyond the reach of even Star Trek universe exploration, where even the most advanced sensors of Starfleet failed to penetrate, something ancient stirred, something that did not belong to this timeline, or any timeline at all. And he saw everything. Uatu the Watcher had always obeyed one rule above all others: observe, but never interfere. Across infinite realities, countless tragedies unfolded before his eyes. Worlds burned, heroes fell, civilizations erased, and still, he remained silent. But this time, something was wrong. Because this wasn't just another timeline, this was a universe where logic ruled, where exploration defined purpose, where hope was written into the stars. And yet, beneath that optimism, something darker was unfolding, something even Uatu could not fully understand. And for the first time in eternity, he hesitated. The USS Enterprise drifted near the edge of an uncharted anomaly, its hull illuminated by a strange pulsing light that flickered like a heartbeat. Inside, Captain Jean-Luc Picard stood at the observation deck, hands clasped behind his back, eyes locked on the distortion ahead. "Report," Picard said. His voice, but something beneath it betrayed unease. "Captain," Data responded, tilting his head slightly. "The anomaly is inconsistent with known spatial phenomena. It appears to be observing us." Picard turned slowly. "Observing?" "Yes, sir. Our instruments suggest a form of awareness, as though the anomaly is reacting to our presence." A silence fell over the bridge. Far beyond their comprehension, Uatu hovered, his immense form hidden within layers of dimensional folds. His glowing eyes were fixed on the Enterprise, on its crew, on the fragile thread of destiny they unknowingly carried. He had seen countless ships like this across realities. He had seen their triumphs and their destruction. But this moment was different, because the anomaly wasn't natural. It was a fracture, a tear between universes, and something was trying to come through. Uatu's gaze shifted beyond the Enterprise, beyond the stars themselves, into a space where even time struggled to exist. There, within the rift, shadows moved, shapes that twisted against the very laws of physics. They were not Borg, not Q, not anything this universe had ever encountered. And yet, they were watching too. "What are you?" Uatu whispered, though no sound traveled through the void. For the first time in eons, uncertainty crept into his mind, because he realized something terrifying. They could see him. Back on the Enterprise, alarms suddenly blared. "Captain," Worf's voice cut through the tension. "The anomaly is expanding rapidly." "Shields up," Picard ordered. The ship trembled as waves of energy surged outward, distorting space around them. Consoles flickered. The stars outside warped, as though reality itself was bending. And then, a voice, not through comms, not through sensors, but inside their minds. "You are not meant to be here." Picard staggered slightly, gripping the console. "Who said that?" Data's eyes widened on almost imperceptible shift. "Captain, I am detecting a consciousness, but it is not localized. It is everywhere." Uatu felt it too. The presence beyond the rift, ancient, endless, hungry, and it was pushing through. He had seen universes fall before, entire timelines consumed by forces that defied even cosmic understanding. But this was different. This was spreading. If it breached fully into this universe, it wouldn't just destroy worlds. It would unravel existence itself. And for the first time in his existence, Uatu faced a choice he had always avoided: do nothing and watch another universe fall, or break his oath and risk something far worse. His glowing eyes dimmed slightly as the weight of that decision pressed upon him, because he knew the truth. The moment he interfered, he would no longer just be a watcher. He would become a participant, and in every reality where that had happened before, there were consequences, severe ones. Back on the Enterprise, the anomaly pulsed violently, and from within it, a shape began to emerge, silhouette too vast, too wrong to comprehend fully. Captain, Data said quietly, "We are witnessing the beginning of something unprecedented." Picard's jaw tightened. "Then we will face it. Whatever it is, but far beyond them." Uatu closed his eyes, and for the first time in eternity, he moved. What if the moment the Watcher chose to act was the exact moment he doomed the very universe he was trying to save? The instant Uatu the Watcher moved, reality resisted. Not violently at first, but subtly, like the universe itself was whispering, "This is not your place." And yet, he descended. through layers of space, through time streams woven like fragile threads, through the unseen architecture that held the Star Trek universe together. Uatu broke the one boundary he had never crossed. Presence became form. Observation became influence. And far below, aboard the USS Enterprise, something changed. The air felt heavier, not physically, but existentially. Captain Jean-Luc Picard stiffened, his breath catching for just a fraction of a second. It was the kind of feeling no Starfleet training could prepare you for, a presence not hostile, but overwhelming. "Report," Picard said, though his voice carried a tension he couldn't quite hide. Data turned slowly, his golden eyes unfocused for a moment, as though trying to process something beyond calculation. "Captain, I am detecting a paradox." Picard frowned. "Explain." "There is an additional entity in this sector. However, it does not appear to originate from within our universe." Before Picard could respond, the anomaly outside surged again. The tear widened, and the thing inside it noticed. Far beyond visible space, Uatu froze. It had felt him. The shadows within the rift twisted violently, reacting not to the Enterprise, not to the stars but to him, to his interference. "That wasn't supposed to happen. They shouldn't be aware of me," Uatu murmured, his voice echoing across dimensions. But they were, and now they were accelerating. Back on the bridge, the view screen flickered, and the distortion coalesced into something vaguely humanoid, but stretched, elongated, like a reflection in broken glass. Worf stepped forward instinctively. "It is a threat." "No," Data said quietly, his voice laced with something almost like uncertainty. "It is not merely a threat. It is a reaction." Picard's eyes narrowed. "To what?" Data hesitated, and for the first time since his creation, he didn't have an immediate answer, because the truth was impossible. "To something outside our frame of existence." Silence. Then the voice returned, stronger now, clearer, colder. "You have been seen by one who should not be seen." Picard's heart pounded. "Identify yourself." But the voice ignored him, because it wasn't speaking to the Enterprise. It was speaking to Uatu. "You break your silence, Watcher." Uatu's eyes widened slightly. They knew him. Across all realities, very few beings were aware of the Watcher's existence. Fewer still could perceive them, and yet these entities recognized him instantly. "What are you?" Uatu demanded. Stepping closer to the rift, the shadows recoiled not in fear, but in anticipation. "We are what comes after observation." A chill spread across Uatu's being. That didn't make sense. Nothing came after observation. Observation was the final layer, the boundary, unless these beings existed beyond even the Watcher's understanding. Back on the Enterprise, the crew watched as the anomaly began to stabilize, not collapsing, not expanding uncontrollably, but adapting, like it was learning. "Captain," Data said, his voice dropping lower, "the energy signature is evolving. It is synchronizing with our reality." Picard stepped forward. "Can we contain it?" "No, sir," Data replied. "It is no longer merely entering our universe." He paused. "It is becoming part of it." The implications hit like a shockwave. If something from beyond reality itself could integrate into their universe, then the laws of physics, of causality, of existence itself would begin to break, and then unravel. Far above, Uatu made a decision, a dangerous one. If these entities were reacting to him, then perhaps he could control that reaction, guide it, contain it. He raised his hand, channeling cosmic energy that pulsed with the weight of countless observed realities. "I will not allow you to consume this universe," Uatu declared. For a moment, everything stopped. The anomaly froze. The shadows stilled. Even time itself seemed to hesitate. Then the voice answered, "You already have." And suddenly, the Enterprise vanished. Not destroyed, not displaced. Gone. Picard's last command echoed into nothingness. Worf's hand remained frozen above his console. Data's eyes flickered once, and then went dark. Uatu felt it again, that shift, that defiance. But this time it wasn't just Picard. Other fragments were stabilizing too. A Klingon battlecruiser, its crew roaring in defiance as their reality stitched itself back together. A Vulcan colony, its people standing in silent resistance as logic itself became a shield against erasure. Even Data, flickering, recalculating, adapting. "I am revising my understanding of existence," Data's voice echoed. "This phenomenon is not deterministic." The correction entity strained, its form glitching as if trying to resume its function. "This deviation must be contained," it said. its voice cracking for the first time. But the new being didn't even look at it. Contained, it repeated softly, "You misunderstand your role." Then, with a single motion, it compressed the correction entity. Not destroyed, reduced. Its vast, universe-spanning presence folded into a small, flickering shape, still alive, still aware, but powerless. Uatu felt something he had not felt in ages. Fear. "You're not restoring balance," Uatu said carefully. "You're overriding it." The being turned its gaze fully upon him now, and in that moment Uatu felt seen, not as an observer, not as a cosmic entity, but as a mistake. "You broke your oath," the being said. "You initiated deviation." The correction attempted to resolve it, and failed. Its presence grew heavier. "Now we resolve both." Uatu's energy flared instinctively. "I will not allow you to erase this universe. You already allowed it," the being replied. The words cut deeper than any force, because they were true. Everything unfolding, this chaos, this unraveling, this intrusion had begun with him, with his choice, with his interference. But then, Picard's voice broke through again. "Then we make it right." Uatu turned. Picard stood, now not in a fragment, but in something closer to a restored reality. Stars flickered faintly behind him, unstable, but present, and he was looking directly at Uatu, not guessing, not sensing. Seeing how, Uatu asked, almost involuntarily. Picard stepped forward, his expression unwavering. "You said you've watched countless worlds," Picard said. "Then you know this. We don't accept the end when it's handed to us." Uatu felt something stir, something unfamiliar. Hope, fragile, dangerous, but real. The being from the rift observed this exchange, its presence tightening. "Defiance is irrelevant," it said. "Outcome is inevitable." Picard didn't look at it. He kept his eyes on Uatu. "Is it?" Picard asked. Uatu hesitated, because for the first time, he didn't know. The correction entity, still compressed and flickering, pulsed weakly as if trying to reassert its purpose. The rift behind them shifted again, unstable under the presence of this new force. And across the universe, resistance continued to grow, small, scattered, but multiplying. The system was breaking. The correction had failed. And now, something even greater had stepped in to erase it all. Unless Uatu made another choice. But this time, it wouldn't just be about breaking his oath. It would be about defining what came after it. The being raised its hand. "Final resolution begins now." Reality trembled. Picard took a step forward. Uatu closed his eyes, and somewhere deep within the collapsing, resisting, rewriting universe, a single question echoed louder than everything else. If even the Watcher could fall, who would rise to take his place? What if the only way to save the universe was for the Watcher to stop watching entirely and become something far more dangerous? For the first time since his existence began, Uatu the Watcher did something unthinkable. He stopped observing, not physically, but fundamentally. The endless flow of timelines, realities, and possibilities that once filled his awareness, gone, silenced, cut off, because he made a choice, a real one. And the moment he did, something inside him changed. The vast, detached calm that defined him fractured, replaced by something sharper, heavier, alive. Across the remnants of the Star Trek universe, the effect was immediate. The fragments stopped flickering. The resistance surged. Picard felt it first. A sudden clarity, as though the weight pressing down on reality had shifted, not lifted, but redirected. "Something's changed," Picard said quietly, his voice echoing through the partially restored bridge around him. Data turned, his form now fully stabilized, though faint distortions still rippled at the edges of his existence. "Yes, Captain," Data replied. "The external influence affecting reality has altered its behavior." Picard's eyes narrowed. "Altered how?" Data paused. Then, with rare uncertainty, he answered, "It is no longer observing us." Far beyond them, Uatu opened his eyes, and they were different. No longer the passive glow of a watcher. Now they burned, focused, intentional, alive with consequence. The being from the rift reacted instantly. "You abandon your function," it said, its voice tightening for the first time. Uatu stepped forward, his presence no longer diffuse across reality, but concentrated, immense, present. "I redefine it," he answered. The void trembled not from destruction, but from pressure. Because Uatu was no longer simply witnessing events, he was shaping them. The compressed correction entity flickered violently, as if trying to reinitialize. "This deviation escalates instability," it warned weakly, but the rift being ignored it. "You are no longer a watcher," it said coldly. Uatu didn't deny it, because deep down, he knew. The moment he chose to act, to intervene, to fight, he had already crossed that line. "I was never meant to be part of the story," Uatu said. His voice carried something new now. Weight, responsibility. But this story was never meant to exist. The being tilted its head, studying him. Then it moved, not with speed, with certainty. Its hand extended toward Uatu, and the space between them collapsed, distance erased, causality bending to its will. But this time, Uatu didn't retreat. He raised his hand and met it. The collision didn't explode, it silenced. A shockwave rippled outward, not of energy, but of rewritten rules. Across the universe, the effect was immediate. Stars flickered back into existence, unstable, incomplete, but real. Ships regained form, voices returned. Picard staggered slightly as the bridge around him solidified further. "What just happened?" he demanded. Data's eyes scanned rapidly, processing more variables than ever before. "Captain, reality is no longer being passively determined." Picard looked at him, meaning Data met his gaze, meaning someone is actively deciding it. Back in the void, Uatu and the Rift being stood locked, not in a physical struggle, but in something far deeper. Control, definition, existence itself hung between them, shaped by opposing wills. "You cannot win," the being said. "You lack the authority." Uatu's eyes burned brighter. "Authority," he repeated. Then, for the first time, he laughed. A low, unfamiliar sound that echoed across the broken universe. "I have watched universes rise and fall," Uatu said. "I have seen beings like you, forces that believe themselves absolute." His gaze hardened. They all said the same thing. The being's form shifted, its edges flickering with something unstable. "You are not meant to resist, neither are they," Uatu replied. He gestured outward, and suddenly, the resistance surged. Picard stood firm as the Enterprise fully reformed around him, systems flickering back online. "Bridge to all decks," Picard commanded. "Status report." Voices poured in. "Engineering online. Life support restored. Weapons systems responding." Picard allowed himself a brief breath, then straightened. "Then we're not finished," he said. Elsewhere, Klingon ships roared back into existence, weapons charging. Vulcan minds focused, stabilizing their reality through sheer discipline. Even Data evolved. "I am adapting," he said quietly, his internal systems rewriting themselves to function within this new, uncertain framework. Back in the void, the Rift being reacted sharply. "This is unacceptable." Its presence expanded, pressing down on the universe again. But this time, it met resistance, not from one, but many. Uatu felt it, the shift, the balance tipping. But not in his favor, not entirely, because even as reality reformed, the Rift was still there, and it was growing unstable. "You cannot sustain this," the being said. "You are not designed for it." Uatu didn't respond immediately, because he felt it too. The strain, the cost. This wasn't observation anymore. This was creation and destruction. Every moment he held the universe together, something within him burned away. "You're right," Uatu said finally. The being stilled. "You are not built for this." It pressed. Uatu looked at the restored stars, at the fighting ships, at Picard, standing defiant on his bridge. "No," Uatu said softly. Then his gaze hardened once more. "But neither are you." The Rift suddenly pulsed violently this time. Cracks formed along its edges, reality tearing unpredictably. The compressed correction entity flickered wildly, as if reacting to something new. "Warning," it said, its voice distorted. "System integrity collapsing." The being turned sharply toward the Rift. "This was not the intended outcome." Uatu took a step forward. "Because this isn't your outcome anymore." For the first time the being hesitated, and that hesitation was enough, because from within the unstable Rift, something began to emerge, not like before, not controlled, not contained, raw, chaotic, and far more dangerous than anything that had come before. Uatu's expression shifted, because he realized the truth too late. By fighting to save the universe, he hadn't just broken the system, he had broken the barrier. And now, whatever lay beyond it, was finally coming through. What if the thing emerging from beyond the Rift wasn't just a threat to the universe, but the end of everything that ever could exist? For a single, fragile moment, everything held still, not frozen, not paused, but bracing. Even Uatu, the Watcher, felt it, that deep, existential pull, like reality itself, was inhaling before something irreversible. The rift no longer pulsed with structured energy. It convulsed, wild, unstable, unbound. Cracks tore outward in jagged patterns, splitting through the partially restored stars of the Star Trek universe. Entire constellations flickered as if caught between existence and erasure. And then it spoke, not in words, in absence. Every sound across the universe dimmed for a fraction of a second, like the concept of sound itself had been questioned. On the bridge of the Enterprise, Picard staggered as a sharp pressure pierced his mind. "What is that?" he whispered. Data froze completely. For the first time since his activation, his systems returned nothing. No readings, no data, no interpretation. "Captain," Data said slowly, his voice stripped of its usual precision. "I cannot define it." Worf gripped his console, teeth clenched. "Then it is an enemy." But even he didn't sound certain, because this didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like an ending. Back in the void, Uatu's entire being tightened. "No," he said under his breath, because now he understood. The correction entity had been a response. The rift being had been a failsafe. But this was neither. This was what existed after both had failed. The rift tore open wider and something began to push through. It had no shape, no form, no consistent presence. It wasn't darkness. It was the absence of definition itself. Wherever it moved, reality didn't break. It simply ceased to apply. "You have destabilized the boundary," the rift being said. Its voice now edged with something unmistakable. Fear. Uatu turned toward it. "What is it?" The being didn't answer immediately, because even it struggled to define what it was witnessing. Then, finally, "It is the null state." The words hit harder than any explosion. Uatu's eyes widened. "That's not possible," he said. "That would mean that existence itself is optional." The being finished. The universe shuddered. And then the null state expanded. Not like an explosion, like a correction of its own. Stars vanished, not consumed, not destroyed, just removed from relevance. Ships blinked out mid-motion. Voices cut off mid-sentence. Picard felt it creeping closer, like the edges of reality were dissolving around him. "Status," he shouted. Data turned slowly. "There is no status," he said. "There is nothing to measure." Picard's jaw tightened. "Then we make our own measure." He stepped forward, gripping the arm of his chair. "All hands hold your positions. Whatever this is, we face it together." Around him, the crew steadied. Fear remained, but so did resolve. Back in the void, Uatu faced the expanding null. "You wanted correction," Uatu said to the rift being. "This is what happens when systems fail." The being didn't respond, because it already knew. The correction entity flickered weakly, barely maintaining coherence. "System collapse. Total," it whispered. The null state brushed against it, and it vanished. Not destroyed, not even erased. Simply no longer applicable. Uatu felt a shock ripple through him. The correction itself, undone. The rift being stepped back, its form destabilizing. "This cannot be allowed," it said, but its voice lacked certainty now. Uatu stared at the expanding absence. "No," he said quietly, then louder. "No." His energy surged not outward, but inward, pulling together every fragment of power he still possessed. The universe flickered in response. Picard felt it. Data recalibrated. Across countless fragments, resistance reignited, not as defiance this time, but as existence asserting itself. Uatu raised both hands. "I broke my oath," he said. The words echoed not just in space, but in meaning. "I became part of the story." The null state advanced. Closer, closer, and now, Uatu continued, his voice steady, despite the unraveling around him. "I finish it." The rift being turned sharply. "You cannot stop this. There is nothing to oppose it. No force, no law." "There is one," Uatu said. The being paused. Uatu's gaze softened, just slightly. "Choice." And then he acted, not as a watcher, not as a force, but as something entirely new. He reached into the very structure of reality, not to control it, but to offer it back. To every being, every mind, every fragment still holding on, a single question: do you choose to exist? On the Enterprise, Picard felt it instantly. Not a voice, not a command, a choice. He looked around at his crew, at Data, at the stars flickering uncertainly beyond the viewport, and without hesitation, "Yes," Picard said. Data turned, his eyes glowing brighter than ever before. "Yes," he echoed. Across the galaxy, Klingons roared their defiance. Vulcans affirmed with quiet certainty. Countless beings, across countless worlds, answered in their own way. Yes, 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 the universe responded. The null state faltered, just for a moment, but that moment mattered. Back in the void, Uatu felt it the surge of collective will, of existence choosing itself, and for the first time, the null state reacted. It slowed, not stopped, not defeated, but resisted. The rift being stared, something like disbelief forming in its shifting presence. This is not within parameters, it said. Uatu's energy flared brighter. Neither is hope. The null state surged again, stronger this time, more aggressive. It had noticed, it had adapted, and now, it was pushing back, harder than before. Uatu staggered slightly. The strain was immense. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a decision, one that couldn't be undone. Because he realized something terrifying. Even if they resisted, even if they held the null state back, there might be only one way to truly stop it, and it would cost everything. Uatu closed his eyes briefly, because he already knew what that cost was. What if stopping the end of everything required the Watcher to erase himself from existence entirely? The resistance was holding, barely. Across the fragile, reforming edges of the Star Trek universe, existence clung to itself with sheer will. Stars flickered like dying embers, refusing to go out. Ships stabilized through determination alone. Voices, millions of them, continued to answer the same silent question. Do you choose to exist? And still the answer came back, yes. But the null state was learning, adapting, evolving, beyond even the strange logic that had birthed it. It no longer simply erased it, anticipated. It moved faster now, slipping between moments of resistance, finding the weak points where doubt lingered, and wherever doubt existed, reality unraveled instantly. Back in the void, Uatu the Watcher staggered, his once boundless presence flickering under the strain. He could feel it, every choice, every mind holding on, every fragment of existence resisting the pull of nothingness, and it was too much. You cannot sustain this, the rift being said, its voice quieter now, not out of calm, but calculation. You are dividing yourself across every conscious will. You are becoming finite. Uatu didn't deny it, because it was true. For the first time in his existence, he could feel limits, pain, exhaustion, something dangerously close to ending. That was always the cost, Uatu said softly. The being studied him. You are dissolving your own existence to preserve theirs. Uatu's gaze drifted toward the distant fragments, toward Picard, standing tall on the bridge of the Enterprise, issuing commands with unwavering clarity. Toward Data, adapting faster than ever, rewriting his own understanding of reality in real time. Toward countless others, Klingons, Vulcans, humans, beings beyond naming, all choosing, again and again, to remain. They were always worth it, Uatu said. On the Enterprise, Picard felt something shift. Not in the ship, not in space, in presence. He turned slowly, as though sensing someone standing just beyond sight. Whoever you are, Picard said quietly, you're not alone. Data looked up from his console, his eyes narrowing. Captain, the external influence sustaining our reality is weakening. Picard's expression hardened. Then we reinforce it. How? Worf demanded. Picard didn't hesitate. By doing what we've always done. He stepped forward, his voice rising not in panic, but in conviction. We stand. The crew responded instantly, not with fear, with purpose. Across the universe, that same resolve echoed, but the null state surged again, stronger than ever before. It had found the pattern, the source, Uatu. It wasn't just erasing reality anymore. It was targeting the one sustaining it. Back in the void, the advancing absence shifted direction, converging on Uatu's position with terrifying precision. The rift being reacted immediately. If it consumes you, it said, the resistance collapses. Uatu nodded slowly. I know, and yet you continue. The being pressed. Uatu turned his gaze toward it, because stopping now would mean it was all for nothing. The being fell silent, because for the first time, it had no counter. The null state closed in, its presence warping even the concept of space around Uatu. The edges of his form began to blur, fragments of his existence peeling away as the absence touched him. Uatu didn't resist, not directly. Instead, he looked inward, across every timeline he had ever observed, every moment he had witnessed, every choice he had refused to make, and he understood something at last. Observation was never neutral. Silence was never harmless, because by watching and doing nothing, he had allowed countless endings. But this time, he chose differently. The rift being stepped forward, its form flickering as it analyzed the situation. "You intend to remove yourself," it said. Uatu closed his eyes. "Yes, if you cease to exist," the being continued, "this anomaly, this chain of events will lose its origin point." Uatu nodded. "The correction will have nothing to fix." The being tilted its head, "And the null state?" Uatu opened his eyes again. "It will have nothing to erase." Silence. Even the advancing absence seemed to hesitate, as though the concept itself disrupted its process. "You would undo your own interference," the being said, "at the cost of your existence." Uatu's gaze softened not with fear, but with acceptance. "I would undo my mistake." Back on the Enterprise, Picard suddenly staggered, gripping the console. "Something's wrong," he said. Data turned instantly. "The sustaining presence is collapsing rapidly." Picard's eyes widened slightly. "No," he whispered, as if understanding something he couldn't fully explain. Back in the void, Uatu's form began to fracture, not violently, but peacefully, like light dispersing. "You don't have to do this," the rift being said, its voice quieter now. Uatu looked at it one last time. "Yes," he said, "I do." The null state surged forward, closing the final distance. "And you ought to let it, but not as destruction, as resolution." His form dissolved into pure energy, then into something even less defined, a choice, a final act. He reached across the universe one last time, not to sustain it, but to release it. The question faded, the burden lifted. Existence no longer needed him to hold it together, because now it held itself. The null state collided with the point where Uatu had been, and everything stopped. No sound, no motion, no time, just a single, impossible moment where the universe decided what it would become next. And then, light, blinding, expansive, rewriting everything. On the Enterprise, Picard gasped, as reality surged back into place, around him stronger, clearer, more stable than before. "Report," he shouted. Data scanned rapidly. "All systems, fully operational," he said, almost in disbelief. "No signs of anomaly. No residual distortion." Worf looked around, confused. "It is over." Picard didn't answer immediately, because he felt it. The absence. Not threatening, not consuming, but quiet. A silence where something vast had once been. Back in the void, the rift was gone. The correction entity gone. The null state gone. And the being that had watched it all, also gone. Only the rift being remained, its form now stable, observing the restored universe. It tilted its head slightly. "Resolution achieved," it said softly. But there was something new in its voice, something it had never expressed before. Understanding, because for the first time, it had witnessed a choice it could not predict, a sacrifice it could not calculate, and a truth it could not ignore. That sometimes, the only way to save everything was to let go of the one thing you could never replace. Far across the stars, the Enterprise sailed forward once more, and somewhere, in a way no sensor could detect, a presence lingered, not watching, not interfering, but remembered. What if the universe remembered the Watcher, even after he erased himself from existence? For a while, there was only peace, not the fragile kind that follows survival, but something deeper, a quiet that didn't feel empty, but complete. The Star Trek universe stretched endlessly once more, its stars steady, its laws intact, its future unwritten. And yet, something was different, subtle, untraceable, but undeniable. On the bridge of the Enterprise, Captain Jean-Luc Picard stood once again before the stars, hands clasped behind his back. Everything had returned: his ship, his crew, their mission. And still, something lingered at the edge of his thoughts. "Mr. Data," Picard said quietly, without turning. "Yes, Captain. Do you remember anything unusual?" Data paused, not because he lacked data but because he had too much of it. "There are inconsistencies," Data admitted. "Residual patterns in my neural net that suggest an event of extreme magnitude occurred." Picard turned slowly. "Can you define it?" Data hesitated, then, softly, "No, sir, only that something was lost." Picard looked back out at the stars. Lost, the word echoed in a way that didn't feel entirely accurate, because loss implied absence. And this felt like presence, just beyond reach. Elsewhere, across the galaxy, similar moments unfolded. A Vulcan paused mid-meditation, sensing a disturbance in logic that resolved into something almost philosophical. A Klingon warrior looked to the sky after battle, feeling as though someone unseen had stood beside him. Countless beings, across countless worlds, experienced the same fleeting sensation, not memory, not knowledge, but awareness, as though the universe itself carried an imprint, far beyond them all, in a space that no longer existed and yet somehow still did. The remaining entity from the rift, observed, silent, still, changed. It had no name, no purpose beyond what it had fulfilled, and yet now, it questioned, because what it had witnessed could not be undone. "You chose to end yourself," it said softly into the void that wasn't there. No answer came, and yet, it felt one. Not in words, in effect, because the universe it now observed was different from the one before, not just restored, evolved. The variables it once categorized as insignificant choice, defiance, hope now echoed across every system, every civilization, every decision. They were no longer anomalies, they were constants. The being tilted its head slightly. "Observation is incomplete," it said, and for the first time, it did not mean that as a flaw. Back aboard the Enterprise, Picard had returned to his ready room. The stars drifted slowly beyond the viewport as he sat, a cup of tea untouched in his hand. He wasn't reading, wasn't working, just thinking. There was someone, Picard said quietly to himself. No evidence, no log, no record, but the certainty remained. Someone had stood at the edge of existence itself, and chosen to protect it, not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was right. Picard allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Then, wherever you are," he said softly, "I hope you found peace." The ship hummed gently around him, continuing its journey into the unknown, exploration, discovery, possibility, the very things that had once nearly been erased, now thriving more than ever, and somewhere, not in space, not in time, but in the quiet spaces between moments, a presence stirred, not whole, not conscious in the way it once was, but not gone, a flicker, a remnant, a question. Uatu the Watcher had erased himself from existence, but existence had not erased him, because every choice made in defiance of nothingness, every moment of hope against impossible odds, every life that continued forward when it could have ended, carried something forward, a trace, a legacy, not of observation, but of action, and as long as the universe continued to choose itself, that legacy would remain, unseen, unspoken, but never truly gone. The stars stretched infinitely ahead. The Enterprise moved toward them without hesitation, and the story continued, not because it was being watched, but because it was being lived, and somewhere, in a way no one could ever fully understand. That was enough.